Welcome to Bethel Church's Leadership Podcast, a talk specifically designed to help you go further faster. It is our goal that you are equipped and encouraged to lead the way you were created to lead.
Hi, my name is Tom Van Kempen, and I pastor Bethel Church in San Jose, California. And I want to welcome you to our Leadership Podcast. This is actually podcast number 1. And so with it being number 1, we wanted to make sure that the first leadership podcast was something that would be really relevant for all, because our goal is for you to be a better leader both in the church, but also outside of the church, in your family and even in your place of work. So we chose the subject of servant leadership. Now, it's such a big subject that it's going to cover actually 2 different podcasts. First, this month and also next month. Where did the term come from? It's interesting when you go through all of the books and periodicals of the last 50 years, it seems to have originated with Robert Greenleaf in 1970, and he wrote an article about servant leadership after reading a book entitled Journey to the East. Now, the book was really interesting because it was about a group of men and women who went to the East in search of some mystical goal of some kind. And there was a servant among the group who seemed to really hold the team together. This servant disappeared. Many years later, the narrator in the book finds out that the servant is actually the leader, and that's why he coins this term and thinks it's a good idea for business. But I don't want you to think that this idea is only about 50 years old. It's actually been around for years and years, thousands of years actually. There is a philosopher in India by the name of Chanakya. He wrote 300 years before Jesus Christ that the king shall consider as good not what pleases himself, but what pleases his subjects. In other words, 2,300 years ago, philosophers were talking about servant leadership. So what is it? I think a good beginning point is this. Servant leadership is understanding that you're not really qualified to lead until you're willing to serve. So I'm going to give you 3 thoughts today to wrap your head around. Number 1 is this: servant leadership must be chosen. It's a choice of some kind. You have to choose to lead or choose to serve before you lead. What does that look like? Well, I can only go to Luke chapter 22, verses 24, 25, and 26, because it says within minutes they were bickering over who of them would end up the greatest. Now, the who that are bickering are the disciples. They're the 12 followers of Jesus Christ, and they're actually fighting over who's going to be the greatest in Jesus' kingdom someday. But Jesus intervenes, and he says kings like to throw their weight around, and people in authority like to give themselves fancy titles. It's not going to be that way with you. Let the senior among you become like the junior. Let the leader act the part of the servant. So what does that mean? He's saying that leadership in that day was primarily about the leader. I think it's the same even today. That what we look for is we look for power, we look for position, we look for prestige, we look for the corner office, we look for the money, but it's selfishly oriented. Servant leadership is about selflessness. It's about serving another human being. It's this idea of bottom up rather than top down. So the main idea here is that you're trying to be altruistic in nature, that you're trying to pull the best out of people rather than look the best in front of people. The second idea in servant leadership is that servant leadership is always a sacrifice. The very essence of serving is sacrifice. Mark chapter 10 verse 45 says this: "For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life a ransom for many." So it says that his purpose was to serve, and then it actually described what service was. It's to give your life. It's to sacrifice something. It's to give up something. So what is it we leaders are supposed to give up? One of the things that we give up is comfort. Being a leader is not convenient. It's inconvenient. We have to give up our time. We have to spend usually more time in the office, more time with people. I think you should have, as a leader, an open door policy to the best of your ability so that the people that report to you can actually believe that you will help minister to them, take care of their needs in some way, shape, or form. It costs us money. There are times where leaders forego their salary. I remember hearing a story of Dallas Theological Seminary in the 1930s. And many of the professors foregoed their salary. And not only did they continue teaching, then even at night, in addition to teaching, they also cleaned the facility. Why? Because they believed in the mission, they believed in the vision, they believed in their president, they believed in the person who was leading them. So you give up comfort, you sacrifice credit. I'm amazed at how many CEOs, how many pastors, how many leaders in organizations get credit for the success of the organization when they really couldn't accomplish anything if it wasn't for the people reporting to them, if it wasn't for their stakeholders, if it wasn't for their customers. And so we as leaders, we need to be giving credit away on a regular basis. We need to sacrifice the credit. We need to take the spotlight off of ourselves and place it on other people. How do we do this? Well, by recognizing those who accomplish something, by encouraging them, complimenting them for their contributions to the organization. We need to lift other people up because somebody lifted us up. I love this quote by Sir Isaac Newton. It says, "If I have seen further than other men, it is by standing upon the shoulders of giants." Think about this. Sir Isaac Newton, one of the smartest men that's ever lived, he recognized that he was standing on the shoulders of giants. So here's my challenge to you. Are you a leader with dirty shoulders? Are you lifting other people up higher than yourself? The final thing that you have to probably sacrifice is control. Don't worry about it. Control's an illusion anyway. None of us are really in control. But when I was a young leader, I wanted to be in control. I wanted to have it my way or the highway. I wanted everyone to follow me. And I've learned that by actually giving up control to people who are around me and people who are supporting me, that better ideas rise up, that more productivity takes place, that there's more buy-in to what it is I'm trying to accomplish when we're sharing all of the responsibilities together. Finally, servant leadership is an attitude. This is interesting because it's probably sometimes the opposite of what you think. And what I mean by that is servant leadership is first and foremost, it's about humility. I'm not talking about being a doormat or anything like that. When I went and got my master's degree in organizational leadership, one of the books that I had to read, and every business person that I know has read, and it's the book Good to Great. And I remember reading at the beginning that Jim Collins made this decision that he did not want to talk about the leader, that he did not believe one man or one woman could influence an organization that greatly. But the evidence kept rising to the surface that they discovered something called level 5 leaders. And these were men or women who were humble, but they were never boastful. They were shunned the public spotlight. They didn't want adulation. They actually set up their successor for more success than what they actually had. But at the same time, they had this determination, this quiet confidence that they knew who they were, what they wanted, what they believed was best for the company. And so they weren't really concerned about what outside people thought. They really were concerned about what their people thought, but not what the stock market said, not what business analysts said, not what newspapers said. They're not enslaved to other people's opinions, and they were never afraid to being taken advantage of by their own people because they were serving those people. How did they do that? Because they really cared. They had genuine love and affection for their own people, for their own customers, for their own stakeholders. And this is one of the keys. Servant leadership flows from a love and authentic, a genuine love for people. This is something that cannot be faked. You can't just say, oh, I'm going to pretend I love people. You either do or you don't. See, there's a difference between an act of service and actually serving. An act of service can be staged, it can be faked, but serving springs from a genuine affection for other people. Coase and Posner studied leadership traits of thousands and thousands of CEOs, and they discovered that the personalities varied widely, except for one thing, an affection for people. I heard this story of President Ronald Reagan, which really impresses me. He was having a summit with Gorbachev in 1985 in Geneva, Switzerland. And so they rented a house, a villa on Lake Geneva. And as the family was leaving, the little kids were panicking that their goldfish were not going to be fed. And President Reagan said, don't worry, I'll feed the goldfish. And so the family gave him instructions, and he followed them to the best of his ability, but unfortunately, one of the fish died. After that fish died, he went and got 2 more fish to replace the one and wrote out a handwritten note to the children expressing his sympathy for the death of the one fish and how he hoped that these 2 fish would replace the one and that they would understand. When I started thinking about that, I'm like, why would the President of the United States even care? He was never going to see this family. He was never going to see these kids again. But the bottom line was he cared. He actually cared about his Secret Service detail so much that he spent all of his Christmases in the White House because the only time the Secret Service could go home was when he was in the White House, and he wanted his detail to have Christmas with his family. The final part of this attitude thing is positivity. You have to be positive if you're going to be a servant leader. That means you don't let the frustrations of being a leader get to you. And I read this quote, and I love it. Frank Warren, the president of Whitworth College in the 1940s and the 1950s, this is what he said. If you wish to be a leader, you will be frustrated, for very few people wish to be led. But if you aim to be a servant, you will never be frustrated. Wow. If we aim to be a servant, we've discovered a secret. And the secret is this: it is more blessed to give than it is to receive. I hope you enjoyed our first podcast. Our goal is that you can be a better leader by being a servant leader. Hope to see you next time.